So you're tired of push mowing your lawn and want to pick up a cheap used riding mower from Facebook Marketplace? What if it needs work to run? Well, today I'm going to show you the basic process of how to fix up and tune up an old riding mower even if it hasn't run for years. And I'm going to take it from this to this. The lawnmower I'm fixing up in this video is a Husky riding mower that I got for $100 at a garage sale, and it is in rough condition. The lady I bought it from said it doesn't run, but it supposedly ran last season. To start out, I cleaned it with some engine degreaser and a pressure washer. If you don't have a pressure washer, a hose and brush will work just fine. Just because something's old doesn't mean it has to be dirty, and cleaning it first helps me be able to inspect various parts for obvious defects since it was caked in grease and dirt. After cleaning, I sprayed the rusty parts with rust reformer. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I'm going to try to make it look not quite so old and busted. Now, I know you might be wondering why I'm working on the cosmetics before I figure out if I'm going to be able to get it running, but I have full faith that by going through the proper process, I'm going to be able to get it running 99% of the time. Next, we'll start the troubleshooting process to get it running. As my grandpa taught me back in the day, for an engine to run, it needs spark, fuel, and air. So we'll go through the process of making sure it has those things in order. For spark, I started with the battery. The one it had was bad and the leads were corroded, so I cleaned off the leads and installed a new battery. I then checked the wiring to make sure there weren't any immediately obvious breaks in it. For fuel, I made sure there was gas in the tank and there didn't appear to be any fuel line issues. And for air, I double checked that the air filter appeared relatively clean and operable. Now, spoiler alert, I will take you a little more in depth with some of this stuff, but this was just my initial attempt to start the engine. One thing you can also do real quick is make sure it's got enough oil. Eventually, you're going to want to change the oil anyways. Also, make sure that all the levers, gear selectors, clutch, and blade control are set to the correct position for starting, because these usually have switches that keep you from starting it if they're not. My first attempt to start it was completely unsuccessful. There wasn't even so much as a turn or a click. This indicates that there's a potential spark or electrical issue, so now we have to check to see if the engine and starter are getting voltage from the battery. After double checking the lines between the battery and the starter to make sure the connections weren't corroded, it looked like everything else was good. So I had to take the starter off and test it and make sure that wasn't bad. And you can see here when I applied voltage from a 12-volt battery to the starter, it spun, so it wasn't the problem. Next, I thought there was potentially an issue with the starter solenoid because it's separate from the starter on these. They go bad occasionally and are cheap, so I bought one off Amazon. Make sure that you unhook the battery when you're working on the electrical lines. In this particular model, the solenoid was under the shifter plate here, which is common with these mowers built by MTD for a bunch of different brands. There was a fuse in the line by the solenoid, so I checked that as well, but it was working fine. I removed the old solenoid and cleaned the wire leads, then installed the new one. After getting the battery reconnected, I tried it again and nothing. If we're following the principles, it means that there's still a spark issue, so next I had to see if the internal switches that keep it from starting, if the levers are in the wrong position, were working. After inspecting switches, it appeared that the one that gets depressed when the cutting deck is raised wasn't getting depressed. Riding mowers won't let you start them when the cutting deck is engaged, so this was my potential issue. In order to test this, I held the deck lever back to depress the switch even further, then tried to start it. And what do you know, it immediately began trying to start. I later fixed the switch by adjusting the positioning a bit. So, we have spark, and now we have to move on to make sure it's getting fuel. A common issue with these old mowers that have been sitting is for the carburetor to be gunked up. Now, you can go the route of trying to clean it and rebuild it, but in my experience, it's a lot less time and stress just to replace it right out of the gate. You can generally get a kit on Amazon these days with a new carburetor, spark plug, and air filter, all for around $20 or less, and a lot of the time, they'll even throw in a fuel filter and fuel line for you. It's well worth it because you might end up having to buy those things anyways, and separately, they're much more. In this case, I actually got the mower running after trying it a few more times, even before putting on the new carb.
Good try, Daddy. You've done it.
But it wasn't running great, so I went ahead and replaced the carb, and it started running much better. To replace the carburetor, you just need to remove the air filter assembly, disconnect everything such as the fuel lines and throttle cable, and unbolt it from the engine. Slip the new one on and put everything back together. When putting it back together, install the new air filter if you have one. While you're working on this, you might as well replace any fuel lines that appear split and cracked. Replace the fuel filter, which in this case is an inline one, and I got a new one with my carb. Also, put a new spark plug in after you've gapped it properly. In my case, for this mower, it was a .030 gap. One thing I like to do is use PB Blaster small engine tune-up to help clean out the internals a bit. Basically, you can take the spark plug out, spray a bunch in the plug hole, and reinstall the plug, but don't reconnect the wire. Then you just turn it over for a bit and let it stand for 15 minutes before you reconnect the spark plug wire and run it again. If you're using the old carburetor and want a low effort way to try and clean it out, you can try spraying into the air intake while it's running. I've seen this make a noticeable difference in engines, so it's just something I do because I can. So now, after making sure it's getting spark, fuel, and air, we have it running fine, so we'll work on some other issues it has which are common with old mowers. First, we'll check all the tires. This one has 2 flats, and we need to determine if they need to be replaced or fixed. If you want to avoid the headache, you can order new ones, and these are easiest just ordered with the wheels, but I'll show you how to check them. To see where the leak is coming from, make yourself a soap water solution in a spray bottle. Then remove the wheel and tire from the mower and fill it with air the best you can. Spray the tire with soap water, and you should be able to see where it's leaking from by the air bubbles. Oftentimes, it's around the rim of the wheel because they start to rust or paint starts to chip. In my case, it was coming from the rim, and my tires are tubeless, so I broke the bead on the rims and cleaned up the part on the tire and rim where they touch. If there is rust or paint cracking, you might need to use a sanding sponge to smooth it out. You want as smooth of a surface as possible here. Once you have done that, you can set the bead by hitting the tire with a hammer while you fill it with air. I already have this one seated, but I'm demonstrating the general method for you. To help them seat a little easier, I use a slight amount of brake or high temp grease around the rim where the bead seats. You want to make sure you get the proper air pressure in the tires, because if you don't, you will leave lines from the mower cutting unevenly. Alright, so I got it running and the tire's up, so I tested it out and it was actually cutting the grass. I was pretty happy, but I had more work to do. Another common issue with old riding mowers is the engine cover mounting bracket breaks because they are often made of plastic. That's what happened to this one, so I cut a piece of steel to fit and put some silicone adhesive on and clamped it and let it dry. Then I drilled some holes to bolt it on and a couple more holes to match the mounting bracket. I was then able to get it mounted back on, and it was nice and solid and probably stronger than the original. While I had the hood off, I cleaned up a rust spot it had and painted it. It doesn't match perfectly, but it's what I had and it looks better. You might have noticed at this point that I also replaced the seat. This is a tractor seat I got at my local farm store, and it's much more comfortable than the original. I next had to sharpen the blades, so I removed them and cleaned them up. I used a grinder and put an edge on them. Some people get wrapped up on what angle to put on them. I don't worry about that. I just get them sharp enough to cut the grass. Next, I sprayed them with rust reformer and mounted them back on. It was at this point that I realized I needed a new deck drive belt. Ideally, you would check this before you took the blades off and put them back on, because if you need one, you have to drop the deck and it will make the blade removal process a lot easier. If you have to remove the deck, you might as well also lube the spindles if yours are lubable or lubricatable. Is that a word? Anyways, it is what it is, and I replaced the belt and was good to go. So now you see I have it running and looking good for its age. I even did the redneck thing and rode it to the gas station to get gas in it. It does a good job cutting, just don't judge my grass. I need to do some dethatching and a lot of other stuff. I've also since built a trailer for it from scraps. If you want to see that upcoming video, feel free to subscribe.
you're good at fixing, huh?
You're great at this. Good job.
You're great at this. Good job.